Hi, Taylor. Welcome to the Integrative Health Coach Success Podcast.
Hi, Julia. What a full circle moment. We did this how many years ago?
I know. I was just thinking I should have said welcome back.
Yeah, I think it's been 4, maybe 5 years.
Yes. I want to say you were in like the first 10-ish interviews, I think, when I first started.
Yeah. Time flies, doesn't it?
It really does. Time flies, things change, life just marches on. I know it really is. Well, share with our listeners a little bit about what you're currently doing. If it's different than 4 years ago with your IHP certification, what you've been up to. And then we're going to get into our topic of the day, which we haven't ever talked about on this podcast. I'm surprised that we haven't. It's something that's a little fresh in your life. And I think it's going to be wildly beneficial to our listeners. So we'll get into that in a second. Give us up to speed.
So I am still utilizing everything I learned through the program, the IHP program. I still have a practice. Taylored WellBeing is still in existence. It's just like people change, the iteration and the presentation of your practice changes. So, I started off in a one-on-one space and that doesn't exist anymore. And I traversed many different iterations of what my practice has looked like, continues to look like, right? And I'm in a place right now where we're exploring rebranding, repackaging, repurposing, evaluating like where I want to go, where my team wants to go. So I'm still utilizing everything that I learned to help people traverse and explore a deeper relationship with their own personal health. And that continues to evolve as it should.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are ever-changing human beings, both, with our physical health, our mental, all of that. And pivoting when we need to pivot. And that's what we teach our clients to do too, right? Being able to, take the path that is most meaningful to their health and their well-being, for sure.
Yeah, I'd be a little concerned if I hop back on 5 years later and I was like, hey, Julia, everything's the same, okay, Taylor, where do we need to do some deeper work? Nope, that's not how it, at least in my very humble opinion, that's not how things should operate. There should always be a healthy evolution of, next steps and what you want to evolve into.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So on that kind of topic, what I would love to chat about next is recently you put one of your dogs to sleep, and
I said bye to one of my babies.
Yes. Not a 9-year-old. Was he Park Great Dane?
He was a Dane Mastiff mix. He was a rescue. So Greg came into our lives after I lost what I consider to be my soul puppy, right? Diesel. I had to put Diesel down rather unexpectedly when I got married. And like so many good codependents who compartmentalize so well do, I stuffed the grief by getting another dog, right? Like I immediately welcomed something new into my life. So I didn't have to sit with the discomfort that existed based on the void that was existing in my life, and I utilized the excuse that I had another dog that was, moping and in need of a companion, which is partially true, but we were told he was a boxer, Julia. When the rescue reached out, they were like, come, we have a boxer available. And I'm like, boxer could be fun, like similar smush face to a bulldog, let's go. And when we arrived, the gentleman brought a miniature horse up into the living room. And I was like, oh my God, this is not a boxer. Did you lie just to get us here? But I told the vet that came to help transition Greg, it was love at first wag for Mo. We were not leaving that place without Greg. He came as Greg and he stayed as Greg. It just fit. Human names are so rad when it comes to dogs. So we got to spend almost 7 years, and I always say we got to teach Greg what good humans look like in those 7 years, because the first 2 years of his life were not pretty, and sadly his big old body decided that it was time to go.
And I think the topic of grief, right? Because talking before when we signed on, like it can run the gamut of it's people, whether it's pets, whether it's, transitions from our lives, our career, our job as a mother, being empty nesters, right? We kind of like ran through it and we'll see where the conversation takes us. But I think like the emotion of grief can be so under addressed, talked about, even overlooked. Like sometimes it can just be like, oh, she's sad, but like maybe she is truly grieving the loss of something. And like, what does that look like to support ourselves as practitioners through moments of that, or support our clients? Because I was even saying to you, like, with the demographic of women that I work with, 35 to 50-ish is usually that age group. Like you're dealing with aging parents. I deal with a lot of women with infant loss who come to me for fertility, and they've had miscarriages, right? And so their grief just presents in so many different ways. And how do you support someone through feeling it and healing it so that it doesn't become, right, like something like you said, where you're just like stuffing the feeling with something else to kind of just go away, which is what a lot of society
people do
encourage us to do, for sure. Yeah. And so I'm sure, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say grief is all consuming, right? And I think a lot of us, at least the generation I was brought up in, right? Like I imagine this is a multi-generation listening audience. So I'm a millennial. I believe you're a millennial, right? Like, I grew up with a generation of parents who feelings were this thing that we just locked in a box. We didn't touch them. We didn't explore them. We didn't express them. A lot of us, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us, and we have adages like, I'll give you something to cry about, or suck it up, or you got to move on, or it's just life, right? So if this is the record that's playing when you're 5, 6, 7, maybe even younger than that, how in the world are you going to develop healthy coping mechanisms and skills to properly process and address emotions as they come into your awareness? They're probably not even in your awareness as they come, right? And a lot of people end up in this state that we call fawning, right? Or dorsal vagal, where their nervous system allows for a shift that it engages a response where you go up and out. Like there's the reason why we say women live their lives neck up, right? Because it's so easy for our protective mechanisms to just kick in and suppress the feeling, because it's what kept us safe and relevant in many of our environments, up to and through school and early career. I think we're starting to see a massive change and transition, especially with women, in the way that they address and deal with emotions. Because as you said, we're dealing with a demographic of women who's being asked to reckon with what happens when we don't address things like grief and sadness and rage and anger. And I would always I think the question for me is, how can I adequately and empathetically walk with someone through an emotional experience if I'm not willing to feel it myself? And I think that's the entry point for a lot of us. And full transparency, I think the depth in my own journey really came in the last 2 years. I intellectually understood emotions like so many of us do. And you can't think your way through feeling, guys. How many of us try to think our way through feeling? And it doesn't matter how many journaling practices you have, or how many somatic movements you have, or nonlinear movement practices you have, or meditative practices you have. If you're attempting to think your way through the experience of emotion, you're going to end up back at square one. And that emotion's got to go somewhere. So where do we see it sit and settle? In our tissues, right?
Which is why therapy can oftentimes lead people just on this hamster wheel.
Yeah.
You're intellectualizing and speaking it, but like, when do you feel it, process it, let it move? I think is what usually sets apart really helpful emotion processing, and just like you said, thinking your way through the feelings, because you can talk about something for a long time, but it doesn't mean you are actually physically processing it.
No, and it's accepting, it's interesting because one of the models of therapy that has been most helpful to get to the point where I was actually able to process, and I'm still processing the grief of loss, is internal family systems. So Inside Out, if y'all haven't watched it, 1 and 2, this is like an incredible, I was saying to a friend the other day, Pixar movies make so much more sense to me as an adult than, like Disney movies made to me as a kid. I'm like, they just land in such a different way. And internal family systems is a modality that was developed by Dick Schwartz, and it was a means of recognizing that we are made up of multiple pieces and parts, that we don't necessarily all have multiple personality disorder, that we do have an anxious part and an intellectual part, an angry part, a protector part, And when we don't recognize those pieces and parts as being part of the collective system that are critical, they are necessary for the full expression of the human that we are. And we cannot be, nor can we be received as the human we are without all of the parts. We begin to exile pieces and parts of ourselves, send them out, shame them. I think shame is a really big feeling expression. Something that many people deal with associated with grief, right? Like shame. I can't be seen in public crying. I can't let my clients know that I need to take a step back in order to tend to the needs of myself and my family. I mean, I imagine that lands for a lot of people pushing through. Mm-hmm. Right. But when we start to explore, understand, and accept those parts, the integration of those parts become so incredible, and they start to let you in, and their expression of whatever it may be. I was saying to my therapist the other day, after Greg passed and the vet left, I crawled into his crate. He was larger than life, guys. Like, he was huge, so I crawled into his crate just to be closer to him. Like, it was his blanket. It was his bed. It was his grief. Shows up in a lot of different ways. And that was one of the ways that I decided to process it in that moment. And when I got into his crate, I, for the first time in 38 years of existing on this planet, understood what dissociation looks like. And maybe this will land for someone listening. I was present, but I wasn't present. And it was like, I was there and I knew I was sad, but I couldn't feel any of the sadness. And it was like that piece of myself was coming in to give me just a little bit of respite from the intensity that I had experienced the 2 weeks prior and just moments prior. It was like, you just take a break for right now. Mm-hmm. I'm going to prevent you from feeling the intensity of the emotion that's associated with the event that just happened. And I'm going to let you watch me do this. It was like permission from a part. I was like, just take me in, and I had so much gratitude in the moment, because sometimes feeling can be suffocating.
Yeah.
And
over what I think why most people kind of ignore it, choose consciously or subconsciously, is because it's the hardest work there is. It's the most
100%.
Most unpredictable. It's the most fearful. At least it's the thing I've been quote unquote scared of the most. I've never been scared of doing a protocol or like the parasites I've passed. I've never scared.
They're easy. It's easy. There's framework and there's structure, where you start and where you go next. With emotions, it's kind of just surrendering. Take the kind of out, right? It's surrendering to the unknown.
Yeah. Yes. And for so many people, that big just component of it is kind of like, I'll just keep doing this stuff and hopefully that will get better. And I think specifically when we talk about grief, right, it's the longer it stays unprocessed, the longer the heavier it gets, the bigger it gets, right? Because we're meant to kind of, the saying, if you want to heal it, you need to feel it, that it somehow weighs. I have somebody that I love dearly that never processed the death of their mom. And like, I see it show up in so many ways.
They get stuck in the past.
Yeah. And like the feeling of abandonment, right? Just like it snowballs.
Intense.
And yes, of, how could you have left me so young, right? There's just so much that I think can kind of unravel from it when it's not kind of felt. And, I said to you, is it a topic you want to talk about? It's kind of really early and so close to Greg's passing. And you said, like, I think it's the best time to talk about it, like right? Because you're like welcoming the mess. That's going to come up is going to come up, and you have the best chance of processing it in that way.
And I think the fact that I've allowed myself to feel literally everything that comes up, my husband, it was like such a beautiful, if every person could pass with the dignity that my dog passed, like surrounded by the people that he loves, in the care of a veterinarian that, God, she just was so tender with us and tender with him, and he was loaded onto a stretcher and a blanket of privacy was put over top of him so he could be transported for aftercare. And my husband, I'm like, it's like the casket walk, right? Like my husband walked him out to the back of the vehicle. But when my husband came back in, he came into the living room and he gave me a hug. And I screamed the most guttural scream I think I've ever screamed in my life. And I imagine, no disrespect to a mom that's lost a child, I know it is not the same. But I imagine that's what it feels like when you love something so deeply and it's gone. Mm-hmm. And I've always had an issue, maybe this will land for you too, like making noise. Mm-hmm. Like I can't take up space that way, And I think it's because I've allowed myself to scream and get angry and cry at the drop of a dime, or even ask my clients to give me some space. The day before we laid Greg to rest, I recorded a 4-minute video for my community where I support them as the practitioner. And I asked them to support me because we are all of the same. And they get to see me in my and they get to see me in my humanity. And sometimes people need to see someone else in the full human expression in order to know that it's safe for them to do the same thing, right? But I think all of these things have allowed me to sit here and have a conversation with you without ejecting from my body or being a crying mess, which that would be okay too, but I don't think you guys want me snotting into the microphone for a solid 45 minutes, Like I think the capacity to hold space for my feelings, grief being the primary one, is what is allowing me to show up in the ways that I've continued to show up. And I took the space that I needed to take. If you're a IHP listening to this or another healthcare professional, you lead by example. Yeah. If you're telling your clients to take a break and you're pushing through one of the most painful experiences of your life, what example are you setting?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. I got so much from the solo show that I did. People just the ability to see someone who they actually thought had it all together, be vulnerable and express a period of time in their life that was really hard. It's amazing what that does for just another human spirit, whether they saw themselves there. It's just feeling like, oh, in this world full of fingertip comparison, everybody who I think maybe has it all doesn't. And I'm no different. And we all have a human experience of all of the things. We experience them at different times. Our valleys come at different moments. Our peaks come at different moments. But by no means is anybody just living up here in the peak all the time. And I think that one thing that we're missing so much is vulnerability and connection. Yeah. So many people and the ability to be witnessed in things like grief and feel like you can fall apart in the presence of other people, even if you're the one that's quote unquote leading some of the time, right? Like you're the leader in the community, but it's really important that they see that you're human and you're leader, but you're also human. And you have an experience that brings you to your knees. They see you there.
Yeah. And I, at this point in my life, at this chapter in my life, this juncture in my life, the litmus test for me with humans that I am probably going to get along with really well are how willing they are to be messy. People that don't ever show me a side of stress or breakdown or emotion, I don't trust you. And I was you at one point, which is probably why I don't trust you, because I know hidden behind that picture perfect smile or like that jovial attitude is probably a lot of pain, right? And that too associated with grief. I mean, I think grief, like we talked about, comes in so many shapes, sizes, and forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be with the physical passing of something. It can be with the transition of one form of yourself to another. Guys, it's painful to part with prior pieces and versions of ourselves. It's painful to recognize that women every 7 years, we talked about this before we hit record, go through a transition, a mental, emotional, physical transition. 35 was a rude transition for me. I imagine it's for a lot of women because you're like, okay, I'm getting closer to that crone phase of my life and my body's needs are starting to change. And the workouts I did when I was 28 don't work anymore. And like, I can't sleep the same way that I used to. I have a different sleep schedule, but like nobody talks about these transitions. So who am I supposed to turn to about like how much I miss what I was able to do, as well as give me hope for what it could look like if I keep going and embrace all that comes with it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's where, to your point, being able to sit with and feel your own grief experiences allows you to show up and support a client through theirs, and just being there to let them do that is and let them know that it's normal. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with somebody who's going through a growing, I always say like a grow up, like the, glow up. Growing through something is incredibly common and normal, and it should happen. And if everything is unmessy for a long period of time,
what are you avoiding? Like that, then I'm like, okay, what areas in the house are an absolute disaster so the kitchen looks clean? Like, you haven't let me go to the living room. We haven't been to the foyer. Like, what's going on in other rooms of the house for this particular area to look pristine? What are you avoiding when there is no expression other than that neutral? To me too, Julia, that just, I hate to use this word, but I'm going to use it because I think it's easy for most people to like to sink into. That speaks volumes in regards to the type of trauma someone's been through. Like, if we are so, I'm not going to say incapable because y'all are capable. So if we are so unwilling to traverse different states of being, what needs to be, like, at that point, what needs to be explored? Because you're missing out on a massive piece of your human experience.
Yeah.
It's so stressful to stay in one vibration, one frequency, one way of being all the time.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I think too, the grief that can come with like that, like being a mom, right? You're a mom.
Oh yeah.
10-year-old son. When you were saying, making noise, like you screamed.
So good at that.
My daughter's cry is the most triggering sound. She like scream cries. Like, she doesn't like cry. She like screams and cries at the same time. Why are you doing this so loudly? I do not say this to her, but I literally do so much like deep breathing, like work on my nervous system when I'm listening to her. And I figured out why it's so triggering to me. And it's because
you weren't allowed.
Because it was basically like, just go to your room, and if you're gonna like lose your ever loving, go to your room and do that. I never send my kids to their room or send them away when they are experiencing the hardest emotions, even when it's hard for me. But yes, I figured out like I could be sad as long as I was doing it like quietly and like a lady.
Right.
But when she's losing it about something that she's quite frankly grieving, she's a loss of something, or she's whatever. Through listening to her, I've actually somewhat tried to heal my own quote unquote trauma or experience as a child. Because if you don't allow that piece like even be seen, right? like you can feel it. If you let yourself feel it, you can like feel the boiling up energy of it not actually being processed. I'm listening to her. I'm like, oh, this crying child was sent to me for a reason.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Sydney was present for the passing of Greg. Like we had a big long conversation. Do you want to be there? Do you not want to be there? We ultimately came to, yes, he wanted to be there. And like, it was so interesting because even just I was trying to be fully present for Greg, and I was also mom. And then I was also attempting to be there for myself. And then man, we don't talk about the number of hats sometimes we have to wear at one time too. And like the grief that comes along with
the point I was trying to make and couldn't articulate it as perfectly and as concise as you just did. Yes, you are literally trying to mother yourself, mother the child, mother Greg, probably even somewhat, maybe mother your husband.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And inevitably someone gets a short end of the stick, and it's usually you. Yep.
Yeah. And at the same time, like the exchange for that was, at least in this particular scenario, I got to watch my 10-year-old literally go through every emotion in the course of 2 hours. Cry, kick, scream, yell, slam his bed with a wiffle ball bat, pace, express anxiety, talk about how he wished you would have spent more time with him, talk about how he wished you would have touched him or kissed him one more time, and then put it down because he felt complete with it. That right there, whether it's, with your internal family system and your own child, or a biological child of yours, or a stepchild, or an aunt, like a niece, a nephew, what have you, that is the prize for honoring your grief. Like that right there, of being able to bear witness to the people you take influence over, having the safety to express the full spectrum of emotion and find freedom in their ability to process. Like if you were not given that, eventually that's what you're being given and gifted, all these opportunities. Like, okay, you didn't get it when you were younger. Here you go. You didn't get it when you were younger. Here you go. It's more or less recognizing the opportunity and taking it.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, am I going to give myself permission this time? Am I going to set myself free this time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And because we are both still in the business of helping people with their health, we can see, or at least, I can, and you can speak to what you see, so many times where unprocessed things manifest physical, and I think autoimmune conditions specifically for women, physical manifestations of disease that are really significantly undermet emotional needs
100%.
Of emotion and whatnot, and helping clients untangle and see that in a very artful way, I think, right? Because some are ready for that, some aren't. And certainly, the physical things like protocols and supplements have their place, but then there's this point where, really tapping into all of that is super important for the client to kind of get further along in their process when there's significant instances of it.
Right. I think, I've been in the healthcare field 14 years. I've been an IHP, solo we're stepping into our 7th year this month on the 19th. Right. At this point, I'm somewhat of a brain bender when people come to me, where I'm just so utterly transparent with, hey, all this exists in terms of tools that we can use, and the tools are incredible. And in most instances, they're necessary. Like, some supplementation is going to be necessary. Testing can be really helpful because it adds a layer of information. We ask the body a question and it provides us an answer. How beautiful is that? Then we get to translate the language that it's using. And none of that matters if you and I don't have honest conversations. None of that matters if you're unwilling to have honest conversations with yourself in moments where I'm not present and no one else can hear what you're thinking or saying. And, it begins the process, pardon me, of asking for permission to start asking really difficult questions like, hey, did you hear what you just said to me? Can you tell me a little bit more about that language? Hey, I've recognized, are you open for feedback? Like, I've recognized that you're really hard on yourself. Where did that start? Whose voice is that? Where does it come from? What does it help you accomplish? Like things that we're just not taught to look at. It is so nice to have a collaborative guide with your best interest at heart on this path, because ultimately you're going to get the tangible tools, and the tangible tools are going to be so well utilized if you prep your ecosystem by starting to unwind that nervous system. And unwinding that nervous system comes through corrective experiences in relationship.
Yeah.
Grief included.
Yeah.
You know,
and questions are so powerful, like for other IHPs listening, when it comes to, clients, sometimes you don't have, like, I think a lot of coaches just starting out, or that people think that they need to insert an opinion
and fix
to get somebody to realize something. And oftentimes just a simple question, which is like you beautifully said, I noticed you're really hard on yourself, because oftentimes I have so many clients like that. They're super type A. They're doing all the things perfectly. And sometimes just acknowledging like, wow, you're really hard on yourself. But have you always been like that? Like and it's a complete innocent question that could lead you to a really,
rich discussion.
Yeah. That maybe the client isn't even aware of, like, their perfection tendencies and how that's manifested, lots of tension in their body and questions are a beautiful way to prompt thought in a client.
Yeah. We forget pieces of ourselves too. It's like asking, another favorite of mine is like, what do you do to play? And how do you experience pleasure in your life and in your body? Oh, and not the sexual connotation of pleasure that society has applied to the word. Pleasure is in, I am fully present in the moment and I feel so. And there are so many people that are like, it's like a deer in headlights. It's that minion moment. I call it the minion moment, where like with their big, cute, beautiful, like doughy eyes, they're just like,
I'm sorry, did you say play?
Yeah, like, what did she just ask? Like, what the hell is, do you like to, so many grown women are like, swing set? When's the last time you got on a swing set? Why?
Yeah.
You don't need a kid to do that.
Yeah,
you got one that walks with you all the time in here.
It's so interesting that you just said that, because I actually swung on a swing next to my little guy for the first time in so long. And I was like, oh my God, this, like, the motion of like pumping my legs, like brought me right back to, I felt like a kid. And I'm like, this, all I have to do is get on a swing. That's interesting.
Oh, and it's free, right? It's free. And it gives you like a real nice, like, endorphin and dopamine hit. And like, you get to go back to what was probably a really happy moment in your life. Like, there's medicine in all of that. And we just miss the medicine because we think that it needs to exist in something outside of us. And that's just not true. Even the grief is medicine. Let it be. And you don't have to choke. It's like a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. Mary Poppins, love her, but like, you don't have to choke any of it down. How can we recognize the beauty of what's being woven into the tapestry of our life? We're being given this opportunity. Like, Greg was a portal to touch on other grief. Oh my God, how amazing. I've had a really tough 2 years. You and I have spoken deeply about it. Did I fully process the last 2 years? Probably not. Did he let me process the last 2 years? I probably completed that cycle. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Because it all keeps showing up until we get there. Right. My therapist so many times, like, is it over? Am I ever going to be? She's like, no.
This is just a continuation. It evolves.
She's like, it's an evolution. And I'm like, an evolution?
Yeah.
Stop. An ending point to the evolution. And she's like, but it's not one of those things where you start it and stop it, because if that were the case, it would be something that needed to be fixed. You don't need to be fixed. You're just evolving, and the work is part of your journey here, your human experience.
And classroom, guys. Hello. I know that might be news to some, which is totally okay, but we are in a big classroom. Every one of us are in a different class with a different curriculum. And like the curriculum is there to help us get to the next classroom or, curriculum that we're supposed to. We will repeat though, like they repeat us in school. You're going to repeat this grade. We will repeat grades, classes, and curriculums until we nail it.
Until you can move on.
Yeah. It's like, okay, if you've done the same curriculum a few times and you're like ready to be done, that means you need to go all in on it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And sometimes, to your point, what presents the opportunity to go all in can be dressed up as one of the hardest times in our life. And walking through that hardship and not trying to go around it, and going straight through it oftentimes can lead to the biggest, breakthroughs that there are.
Yeah, grief is merely the absence of love, So like if we can start looking at it through the lens of, whoa, this hurts this bad because I loved that much. Mm-hmm. Wow, what a gift, like for us to recognize the ability to love and be loved in our life, because that's really what we're all striving for.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I had reached out to you, I think when I found out about Greg, I love the saying, grief is the ultimate price we pay for love, because loving hard means that, unfortunately, especially with pets, that there will inevitably at some point be an end. And would you have it any other way? I don't think so. Nobody ever would. Same thing with like my kids, right? Like, because could one of my children decide that someday, they're moving to California and never coming home? Possibly. Yep. Would I have done anything? Would I have regretted a single moment of all the love I poured in? No, I'll probably regret not having poured more love in. But it's one of those where you just, love is, there's not a moment where you would ever do anything different, knowing still what the outcome would be.
It's interesting because I think the majority of the dysfunction that exists within our lives, be it physical, physiological, psychological, interrelational dysfunction that exists within our lives, is merely because we're attempting to establish love and we don't know how to, adequately do it. We're attempting to repair something that has been ruptured in the ultimate name of establishing an experience of love with someone or something. Even the body, the symptoms love you. It is not a reflection of hate, distaste, malice when your body is symptomatic. It is the ultimate expression of love, although it may not feel that way. It is, guys, we could be dead in 2 seconds. The body is capable of doing that. Like, hi, lights out, 1, 2, we're done. Mm-hmm. Think of the number of things that many people traverse in order to finally get to a place where they're like, oh, this is what I had to look at. This is what I needed. Like the body hung with us. Yes. And talk to us the entire time. Ultimate expression of love, even if it feels dysfunctional.
Yes. And the only difference between that and another thought process is the perspective. And I think that's what we can offer clients. Is I always say to my clients, like, I'm not fixing you. You don't need to fix yourself because you were never broken to begin with. Mm-hmm. This is simply, you're getting messages that something is off, and we are going to give your body what it needs to rebalance. But there's no fixing here, because if there was something to be fixed, it would insinuate that you were broken, and you are not broken.
Right.
Sometimes just clients hearing that because they've hated their body for quote unquote letting them down for so long.
It's so sad, isn't it? To like witness somebody in that. It's like it's a little heartbreaking.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Because you're never going to hate your body well. It's just never going to. I haven't seen a client do it yet.
No.
And oftentimes too, I think when it comes to like the pattern of grief, being able to not permanently associate yourself with the symptoms that you've dealt with for so long, right? Like I've seen clients like almost grieve the old version of themselves that was really tied to being sick and miserable and unwell. And they almost had to like grieve that part of them to see that they could thrive and be well and that they deserved that, right? Like we can even grieve, to your point earlier in the show, versions of ourselves.
Yeah.
So we transform into something that really leaves an old part in a way, not that we're exiling it, but to thank you.
It's done its job.
Yes, but like no longer serving the goal here.
Right. It's done its job, and I think every aspect or every ounce of the healing process offers an ounce of grief with it. I think I would be concerned if someone showed up and in their process experienced zero grief. And I think grief hides for a lot of people too, right? Like it's not until you speak it into existence or you reflect it back to them like, hey, I'm recognizing that you're doing this cyclical thing because you're attempting to attach yourself to the identity of the person you showed up as. And I just want to remind you or let you know that it's completely normal to grieve what you're leaving because she got you here.
Mm. Yep. And did a good job at some point protecting something, whatever the things. Yeah.
And I don't think there's any way. It's interesting because like as a practitioner or as a client, I don't think there's any way around it. I don't think there's any hacks for it. I think the ultimate hack is the way to the other side is through, right? There is no like, well, I can get over, I can go around, I can go under. No, you can go through. And if we choose not to go through because you are capable of going through, you're probably going to end up experiencing and existing within the same grief that sits with you right now. So if it feels heavy, put it down.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. And I would love to just ask you one more question as far as with your process with even helping like your son. Did you see through him, like just allowing him to have his experience that it almost like processed and just went, is he still experiencing bouts of, no.
He taught me, my child continuously teaches me life lessons. I'm like, okay, you're the old soul in the house, not mommy. Like you're the one that came in with like, packing a punch with the wisdom here. It's so interesting. He was so matter of fact when we made the decision, before we helped Greg transition, he was like, mommy, he's going to die. We gave him the best life we could give him. And all we can do is love him. And it's sad. And I'm sad, but he's going to die. Like he was just this, I'm like, are you an 80-year-old man buttoned up in a 10-year-old's body? Like it was just he was so matter of fact. Right. And then after the fact, he was like, I loved him so much. And I feel better now. I wish I had spent more time with him. I wish I had touched him, before he passed. I wish I cuddled with him more. Like he expressed those things, but it was more or less like, he was like, I want to move on. I don't want to spend my next few days in grief. And I was just like, I'm going to wreck my car listening to you because you're just dropping like one knowledge bomb after. He's like, I don't want to be depressed. I want to move on. I grieved.
Yeah.
And now I want to remember the happy times. And I'm like, you're dead. Okay. Like take a page out of your book, kid.
I know they're so unfiltered, which is like the most beautiful part of kids. Is like, it's like, they're not trying, like they don't know enough to try, right? It's just like the unfiltered version of like, my gosh, like,
showing me what's possible, like showing me that even though I know it, it's easier as we get older to get stuck in certain patterns. So even me, sometimes I need that very tangible reminder of like, it's okay to not be so sad after you went through such a significant event. It's okay to have, cried and done your own process with grieving, which I still have moments, guys, but at the same time, it's okay to be happy too. And his vet said something interesting to me where she was like, dogs deserve no bad days. And I'm like, yes, humans deserve no bad days too. Okay. Like we're just going to apply that across the board. She's like, and you know what? He wouldn't want you sad. I'm like, all right, I'm getting taken to town by his veterinarian now. Like, she's like, he wouldn't want you sad. Our dogs want us happy all the time. And he wouldn't want you sitting at home crying. So cry your tears, dry them, have your moments when they need to come up. But remember, he would want you happy. And I think that applies to people and pets and perhaps babies we never got to meet or babies we got to meet, but were short-lived in their, time here on earth. I think it's anything that is immensely important to us would want the same thing for us because I think they have a degree of understanding that we haven't quite gotten to yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, honoring anything that we've loved with with showing up in the world as, the most present,
the fullest, brightest, most vibrant, like expression of who we are. My God, like don't spend your life suffocated in a small box.
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of processing it, because then it can be processed and it can be done versus it having this like slow drip and, grip on you and kind of just dimming you to this slight degree. And I think that's kind of the point that we've, talked about the whole time is, supporting clients, supporting ourselves through the process of grief, the feeling, let it be there, feel it, heal it, and then moving on to, our most kind of bright, vital self.
Yeah. And people grieve in different ways. Some people need a rage room. Cool. I'm all about them. You know what I mean? Some people need to scream into a pillow. Some people need to dance because, joy is the utmost expression of grief too. Some people need to cry. So like recognizing, I truly believe, as I said before, you only recognize and honor someone else's grief when you've traversed and allowed yourself to experience your own, but when you recognize that someone's in their grief pattern and they're not recognizing it, like they're not conscious to it. That's a good way of putting it. Just being like, hey, can I interrupt this spiral you're in and reflect something back to you? And like, what do you need? So many people think they need to sit in meditative practices. And I'm like, or you need to move the energy. That's equally as therapeutic, or you need to cry because it's caught in your throat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think I've shared this with you before, but my dad always had a saying, everything needs water to grow. We would cry and he would say, it's okay, you can cry. Everything needs water.
I love that.
Yeah. And I couldn't scream and yell because I was a lady, but I could cry because I could be emotional, just not loud, Taylor.
Not too loud. And so interesting too. I don't know if you're in this place personally, like I'm learning how to use sound again and being okay with the sound of my voice. Like even with crying, like it was a silent cry. And there was this part of me that was like, I don't want to be quiet. And I'm like, oh, make noise. Like seeing Sydney not make noise gave me a bit of permission to be like, oh, that's how we're going to get used to it. We're just going to like slowly learn how to let it roll with the cry.
Yeah, I've actually been doing like humming, like loud noises like help to release my jaw. Yeah, because
where does it get trapped?
Keeping my mouth shut.
Yeah. Or like cutting your voice off, thyroid problems. I mean, this could go so many different ways. And again, if you don't allow yourself to experience the grief, the pain, the sadness, we're really good at like the happy emotions most of the time because they feel good, right? They're intoxicating. But, if we're not good at or willing to or comfortable with, maybe that's the best way to put it, these less attractive emotions, your body's constantly bracing for impact. Oh my God. There is no addressing that stress until your body becomes unwelled. Or at least that's my humble belief in that.
Yes, I completely agree. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your very recent experience and your wisdom and everything that you did with our listeners. I think it was a great conversation that many will, I think, realize that was incredibly helpful and they didn't even know they needed to hear.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here on the Integrative Health Coach Success Podcast for round 2.
Thank you so much for having me. Full circle moment, round 2.
Yes.
We'll do it again in another 5 years, guys.
Yes.
We'll make it a 5-year, a 5-year demarcation every 5 years.
5-year anniversary.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Julia. It was my pleasure.